Hello, dear ones. Father Peter John coming to you from All Saints Orthodox Church in Bloomington, Indiana. Christ is in our midst. Today we're speaking about step number 26 on the ladder of divine ascent by St. John Climacus. The title of step 26 is On Discernment. Let's get to it. What is discernment? Well, St. John tells us, he says, discernment in beginners is true knowledge of themselves. He says in intermediate souls, people who have some experience in the spiritual life, he says that discernment is a spiritual sense that faultlessly distinguishes what is truly good from what is of nature opposed to it. And then he says in the most spiritually advanced, he says discernment is a divine illumination which can enlighten with its lamp what is dark in others. So there are these three different stages. Most of us are in the beginner stage. I'm just going to go ahead and give you the punchline right now. What does that mean? Well, let's talk about that. Socrates, the great philosopher of ancient Greece, taught what other philosophers taught in Greece as well, which was know thyself. It's great advice. Know thyself. That's what St. John is talking about in the beginner's discernment. Know thyself. One of the fathers of the desert in the early church said, to see your own sins is a greater miracle than raising the dead. Know thyself. So you see, discernment is pretty important. I'd say it's very important. Let's see what else St. John has to say about it. He says, discernment is undefiled conscience and purity of perception. And then he says, after God, let us have our conscience as a mentor and rule in all things, so that we may know which way the wind is blowing and set our sails accordingly. Keep in mind, of course, that St. John is teaching this in the context of knowing that anyone reading this book, any of the monks in the desert who might be reading this, would be in obedience to a spiritual father. So he's not saying it's just me and Jesus, right? He says, after God, let us have our conscience as our guide. But he, in that very statement, is also holding it as a given that the person reading this book has someone else who knows everything about them, their spiritual life, their ups and downs, and that would be their spiritual father. St. John tells us, gives us this little anecdote. He says, in drawing water from a well, sometimes without noticing it, we bring up a frog with the water. And so in acquiring the virtues, we often get involved in the vices that are imperceptibly intertwined with them. The kind of thing I mean is that gluttony is entangled with hospitality, right? You have somebody over, you're serving a bunch of really yummy stuff, and what do you end up doing? You end up gorging yourself and say, well, it was because I was being hospitable that I gorged myself. He says, lust is entangled with love, cunning with discernment, and he says despondency and sloth can be entangled with stillness. So in other words, somebody is trying to be still, they actually become very lazy and despondent, and then they get all mixed up. They think they're living a life of quietude, and they just end up depressed and lazy. So all of us can learn a lot from St. John on this topic of discernment. It's important for us to be discerning. Again, I focused only on the beginner phase because, like I said, that's where most of us are. And those who are intermediates or advanced probably don't need to be watching these videos anyway. God bless you. Christ is in our midst. He is and ever shall be.